Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 6th of October 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. And joining me today in a moment via Skype is the Reverend Andrew Ashdown, and we will be speaking matters Syria. But just before we get into that with Andrew, I'm just going to mention the International Civil Defence Organisation. Now, we discussed this on the programme a number of weeks ago because this is an international intergovernmental agency that is highlighting, and it's an organization for civil defense organizations from right around the world. And as we mentioned with Vanessa Beeley a number of weeks ago, this organization, one of its founding members, was the real Syrian Civil Defense. Now, of course, all the focus in the last number of weeks has been on the white helmets. And yesterday, Joachim Flores pointed out to a number of people that the I.C.D.O website had replaced or at least had created a link to the Syrian Civil Defense, which on their website as a member, which pointed to the White Helmets website rather than the Syrian Civil Defense website. And of course, the White Helmets are not a member of this organization. So Vanessa called them and asked for comment. And she said that she was wondering if the organization could explain why the link on their website to the Syrian Civil Defense had been linked to the White Helmets website. The response she got was this: "I will explain to you directly. We had so many calls and emails this morning. It was a database mistake, an internal mistake. We are still an apolitical and intergovernmental organization. The only civil defense we recognize, the only government we recognize is the official one. It was just a mistake, the link to the wrong civil defense. Actually, the White Helmets are not even civil defense concretely. No, it was just a mistake and it was corrected immediately. I'm surprised that last night so many people are watching our website." So Vanessa then went on to ask, well, there's so much confusion over who the real Syrian Civil Defense is and who are the White Helmets. And the I.C.D.O representative replied, absolutely. From our side, we're working in the field and only with official governments. We don't even talk about any political issues. And so to confirm this, Vanessa said, good. So as far as the I.C.D.O is concerned, the real Syrian Civil Defense and the Syrian government are officially recognized by the I.C.D.O. The representative said, yes, it's the only one that's recognized, by the United Nations and by us also. So just to confirm once again, so the Syria Civil Defense is the only organization recognized in Syria by the United Nations and by the I.C.D.O. Is that correct? And they replied, yes, the official one, not the White Helmets. So indeed, they are now linking correctly to the real Syrian Civil Defense website. They say it was a mistake. I have no reason to doubt that whatsoever. Remember, the real Syrian Civil Defense they are continuing to pay their dues to the I.C.D.O. The White Helmets are not. And so really the point of this is to make the point that the I.C.D.O. does not recognize the White Helmets, despite what all the press coverage might be suggesting at the moment, and what the British Foreign Office, and particularly Boris Johnson last week, might be suggesting when he gave the White Helmets a new grant of £36 million. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Andrew Ashdown to the programme. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. Have you any thoughts on this issue?
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you. Yes, I think the evidence now is piling up to show that really the White Helmets, well, we know that they're a funded organization. The British government and the American government have piled funds into them as well. I think Vanessa has researched that very diligently. They're also deeply embedded within Eastern Aleppo, amongst terrorist groups, and have been shown to be involved in some very brutal actions, actually, against Syrian soldiers and civilians from the other side. So I doubt that I absolutely accept Vanessa's claim, research that shows that they're not exactly who they say they are. And that we're getting all our information, not all, most of our information as regards what's going on in Aleppo from them. actually I think is deeply disturbing, especially having recently been to Aleppo and visited the city myself and spoken with the city's senior council of doctors there.
Okay, well, look, let's discuss that visit and discuss your relationship with Syria, because you've been going there for quite a number of years now. Give us a little bit of the background to why you got involved in Syria in the first place.
Yes, I've been visiting Syria since about 2000 or 2003, I think, was my first visit. Um, I've been visiting the Middle East for 30 years, and when George Bush uh, and labelled, well, in May I think it was 2002, the he labelled three countries as part of the axis of evil, and then another, I can't remember who it was exactly, brought Syria into that axis. I felt it important to go and see for myself, because what I was hearing from people in the Middle East about Syria didn't reconcile with that necessary view. So I went to visit the country myself, and subsequently took several visits, several group visits, to meet the faith leaders, to visit the country, all areas of the country, and to meet with different communities and to learn about the country. And probably took a few hundred people on visits to the country prior to the conflict. In 2010, I took my family on holiday, and we drove around Syria in a hire car, meeting friends and getting to know the country as well. Um, since 2014, I've been to Syria now. This was my fifth visit last month, since 2014. And in those visits, meeting a huge number of people across the faith communities and across the various sectarian communities as well, and all political, not all, quite nearly all political perspectives as well, represented in these visits. And it's been a profound experience, a deeply moving experience. And what I find deeply upsetting, actually, is that so few people are actually going to Syria and listening to Syrian people on the ground, listening to what the people themselves are saying, whether they're Sunni or Shia or Christian or Alawite, Druze or Kurd. Um, we're getting a very, very narrow perspective. And this was why I led this group last month.
Right. So we do have a picture here of you in Syria with this group, and these are quite senior politicians and church people. Tell us who's in this photograph with you here.
Well, first of all, the Grand Mufti of Syria is there. He's a profound spiritual figurehead. He is the most senior Muslim cleric in the country. Um, Sadly, he's vilified by many. From some Muslim figures, he's vilified because he holds perhaps one of the most liberal approaches to Islamic theology that I've ever come across anywhere else in the Middle East, amongst any other leader. He's passionate about the protection of the minority faith communities and all faith communities. Um, he's also accused of saying horrendous things, which actually he's defended himself absolutely, and explained that the things he'd reported as been saying have been completely misrepresented, as is so often the case. Um, we're standing there with Harut Silliman. He's the president of the Armenian Evangelical Church in Aleppo, one of the people who invited us. Um, and then the delegation, which included uh, two peers and one bishop and other members from Oxford, and it was a significant visit. And we went to listen to voices. We went as far as we could with an open mind to hear and to see the situation on the ground, which is in many ways very different to what we hear about. What I always say that there are many narratives. All narratives contain some truths. Um, no narrative contains a whole truth. But we've had one particular narrative. And so we went and we met with faith leaders, Christian and Muslim faith leaders, political leaders, both government people and people in the internal opposition, um, and talked to ordinary people, internally displaced people, local communities on the ground, and hearing their stories, and their cries, which actually are fairly consistent, but which we don't hear much of in this country.
I mean, this is just a sort of side note, but at least one of the peers that was there was I believe over the age of 80. So that was quite a significant trip for somebody of somebody of that age to make.
Yeah. And absolutely, and he particularly Lord Hilton has been, in fact, both Lord Hilton and Caroline Cox have been very involved in international affairs around the world, particularly in issues of conflict and also particularly where there are faith issues as well. Um, and we wanted to go and engage with the different communities and the different faiths as well, and engage in dialogue and listening.
And you did meet with President Assad, and I'm just interested to get your thoughts on that man, and also what your colleagues that were with you thought following that meeting.
Yeah, I know we received such a horrendous backlash from this, which I find quite sad. Some people say we're very naive not to expect that. Um, One of the reasons that we agreed to go and meet with him was because we feel, all of us actually felt absolutely, that the no conflict in the world has been solved without talking to key parties involved. Um, Assad, whether people like him or not, is the president of the country. He's one of the key parties, and conflict resolution or reconciliation involves, or you can't exclude. Um, and so we met with him. We had 2 hours with him, which was a very generous amount of time, just us and one person taking notes. He made it absolutely clear that we could ask whatever questions we wanted to ask, and we confronted him with all the major sort of accusations of which he is confronted by the international community, by the media, um, and he answered, very very well, very positively. Um, and I think with sincerity actually as well, although many people would dispute that. Um, and he came across as really desiring the best for the country of Syria, and also making clear absolutely that he is fighting multiple terrorist groups as well. So it was a very good meeting, and I think people should be listening to him and talking to him.
Yeah. So, and what about the people that were with you? What was their impression, and what did they bring away from that meeting and from the trip as a whole? Actually,
Um, they came. I think everywhere we went, the narratives that we hear here in the West are just completely almost thrown out the window. Um, you know, when um, sorry, can you carry on?
okay, no problem. But look, let's move on then, because we'll have a look at some of the sites and some of the people that you met. So here, first of all, this is the mosque in Damascus. Is that right?
That's right. It's the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. It represents. I mean, it started out as a historic basilica. It's one of the most important religious sites, and it just, in a sense, it just represents the importance of faith. Syria has been for centuries. They call it the cradle of civilization and the cradle of faith. It's a diverse community. This is one of the things that people in Syria are saying again and again and again. For centuries, we have been a pluralistic, diverse community. You walk around Damascus or Aleppo, or it's even still in West Aleppo, which is the majority of the city, people of different communities, whether faith communities or cultural communities, live together. They mix together. You know, churches and mosques are side by side. And this plurality, this diversity is something that the people of Syria want to maintain and are desperate to maintain. And we met many Sunnis, for example, who are absolutely opposed to the Wahhabi ideology that is behind so much of groups like ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra and so forth. Um, and want to maintain that plurality and diversity of Syria, for which Syria is rightly famed.
Okay, so I mean, what is the support or otherwise for the Syrian government as it currently stands among, for example, the Christian community in Syria?
I think this is what many people in the West find very hard to understand. And it's Assad personally continues to hold a huge amount of support amongst many sections of the community. Um, and that came across very clearly. most people inside Syria, and this came across also from people, internally displaced people who had fled from rebel-controlled areas. Um, the Syrian government, whatever its strengths or weaknesses, has protected the minority groups. The faith communities have been protected. It is a secular community, a secular country, and Assad has kept that as a secular country. It's not an Islamist state. And all the people that we met, including many Muslims, Sunni and Shia, said we want it to remain a secular country. We don't want it to become an Islamic state, which is the declared intention, not just of Jabhat al-Nusra or ISIS, but actually other groups which we claim to be moderates with them. You have up there the picture that was taken with me with Muslim leaders within Aleppo. And this was in the city of Aleppo, and they were actually supporting the government as well, and opposing absolutely the extreme ideologies of those fighting in eastern Aleppo. One's got to remember that in Aleppo itself, it is a divided city. We see the pictures of devastation. The devastation is huge. It's there. It's real. And the 5-hour journey from Homs to Aleppo is a heartrending one, in which we pass most of the deserted, destroyed villages and towns. But when you get to western Aleppo, the city is there. People are trying their best to live with a degree of normality, although there's very short electricity supplies. Water has been cut by the rebels, but the communities are living there together. People are out on the streets. People are going to cafes. People are going to schools. And they're being bombed all the time by our friendly, so-called friendly rebels, with missiles, and people being killed every day. It was quite touching, moving, that actually on one day on the way to Aleppo, we stopped at a Syrian army checkpoint and stopped and had a break and had some refreshments and talked to the soldiers. The next day, that checkpoint was blown up with a suicide bomber. All the soldiers were killed. There was an estimated 40 civilians killed and many others injured. On that one day alone, there were 4 such suicide bombings, killing hundreds of people and injuring many, many hundreds more. This, I don't think, we were there, but I don't think it was mentioned on the Western media at all. This is happening on a daily basis. People of Aleppo, West Aleppo, are suffering under the missiles and the hellfire cannon of the rebels every day. I'm not justifying violence in any way. I don't believe in violence, and this is why it's hard. But I don't think either that we should depend on one narrative alone. There are other narratives, there are other stories, there are other wishes, and how the mainstream media can claim to be presenting. There's no objectivity whatsoever in the narrative, in the reporting that we're getting. It's 2 million people are being ignored in Western Aleppo, whilst the voices of, is it 200,000? Where are those 200,000?
Yeah.
They say 50,000 of those are extremist terrorists, and the rest their families, all people who are held. And we spoke to internally displaced people, who were told how they were kept virtually as human shields by the rebels before they could flee. So again, there's other narratives. There's this other reality which is there, which we're just not hearing. Which means that the rest of the world is getting an incomplete picture and an inaccurate picture of what's really going on the ground.
Yes. Now, a few minutes ago, we were looking at the mosque in Damascus, and I think you said that was 1,400 years old.
Yes, nearly.
Yeah. This is another example of really culture which has been in Syria for centuries, but unfortunately, some of it is being destroyed by what's going on. So, tell us a little bit about this.
Yes, this is in the town of Malula. Malula is one of the ancient Christian towns of Syria. It's known, it's known because of a Saint Thecla, who was a disciple of Saint Paul, was there. So from the earliest days of the church, Malula has been a Christian village, had Muslim residents as well, and a place of pilgrimage, both for Christians and Muslims, actually, for centuries. It's also one of the few places in the world where the language of Aramaic, the language of Jesus, is still spoken. In 2013, I think it was, Malula was occupied by Jabhat al-Nusra and the FSA. Now, we tried to, when we were told the FSA were there, we tried to double check. Like you said, the FSA. Now, the FSA, again, are, are reputed to be moderates. That doesn't reflect the narrative I've heard from people, internally displaced refugees outside Yarmouk and Damascus and Latakia, actually. Um, but they overtook the village, and three we met. One of the women whose three relatives, male relatives, were killed as soon as when they wouldn't convert. Um, and 20 young people were taken hostage, and they've never been seen since. And the churches and shrines in Malula were very, very badly damaged. And this picture shows the burial places in Tekla cave, which are completely burned out in an attempt to destroy the Christian heritage there. Um, and the people there are traumatized, absolutely traumatized. Um, and remember, the communities, the Muslim and Christian communities, have lived together for generations. Yes, they've had their ups and downs, um, and the divisions and fractions which have appeared in the last few years are creating huge concern and pain to all the communities. And Malula is one place where actually now the government is actually helping to restore the shrines, to rebuild the homes, and some people are coming back. And the Muslim families are still there and coming back, as well as Christian families as well, and trying to rebuild the town and rebuild the shrines as well. One of the things that I saw, I mean, was development from when I was there in February. I was there in February this year and September this year. Was more improvements on the ground. Um, it was quite surprising to see, for example, a motorway service station on the road to Homs, which when I was last travelled that road was completely devastated everything. And now you see some buildings being rebuilt, public infrastructures being restored, because in many of the government areas um, there is a moderate degree of safety in inverted commas. Um, and where that's the case, some people are coming home and people are feeling a little bit more secure. But on top of that, you have the profound impact of the sanctions against Syria, which is affecting everybody, um, especially things like medical supplies and hospitals and things like that. Um, and the collapse of the Syrian pound means that people are suffering from real poverty now, um, and the sanctions having a devastating effect on the whole economy as well as the war, of course.
And the any rebuilding that's going on, is that happening? Is that Syrians doing that for themselves, or is Russia and maybe China helping with that?
Sure, Russia's helping as well, but actually the Syrian government is we were told is doing quite a bit by people on the ground and local communities. I have to say that when I visited a joint Sunni Christian village last November and stayed in a monastery just a few kilometers from ISIS lines, and there were shells going off all night and gun battles going off nearby. Um, the villagers were supporting each other. Both the Christian and the Sunni Muslim villagers were protecting each other, and the churches, which had been badly damaged by fighters, were being restored by the local people, by the local Christians and the local Sunni Muslims. So local communities are getting onto this as well. There is also the important element of the reconciliation on the ground. Now, there is a really impressive process of reconciliation happening in Syria, which once again is being ridiculed or ignored by the outside world, where local communities, often led by the faith communities, both Christian and Muslim, are trying to encourage people to lay down arms and trying to encourage understanding and listening to different voices and listening to concerns, and rehabilitate fighters into communities if they will lay down their arms. Um, and it's had some success. There have been some real successes.
And this is the type of work that Mother Agnes is doing in particular, isn't it? For example.
Yes, she's been involved in that work and doing inspiring work. She's been vilified for the work that and it's remarkable that people who are trying to do good work are often vilified for it or labeled with being Assad apologizers or whatever. As some of the church leaders we said, we met, say that as Christians It's not that we support the regime as such because we support the regime, but we support a government which is actually holding a secular approach to society and has the minority communities have been able to flourish within that context. Um, yeah.
Okay, okay. Well, look, let's just look at a little bit of normality, because I think you said this is a market in Damascus, and at least in a government-held area. So,
Right.
so sort of normal life trying to come back to these areas.
Yeah, and in a sense, normal life has gone on. I mean, I was in Damascus in 2014 when shells were falling every hour randomly and people were being killed. Of course, this wasn't reported, and in fact, two young men were blown up outside my hotel room one morning, just maybe 10 meters from where I was staying. Which was pretty horrific, but this sort of this random killing is part of the conflict, part of what the rebels are doing as well. And yet people are trying to go on. I you know, pe- people are really struggling in Syria. And yet you go into Damascus, and some of, for example, the artisan shops are still open. And I said to people in the artisan shops, how do you make money? And they said, nobody buys anything here. But our resistance to terrorism, they said, is to keep going, to keep Syria alive, to keep it as a plural country, that when one day when the war ends, people can come back and recognize the culture and the history of this country, and see that we've kept it alive even during the conflict. So people are trying to carry on. It's increasingly difficult financially, um, and but there's a real commitment to trying to maintain that diversity and community.
Okay, and well, tell us about this one.
Well, in Aleppo, we were invited by the Armenian community in Aleppo, and we went and we met some of the church leaders there, and also the local Muslim leaders as well. This is a very moving visit because even as we met with them and had dinner with them the previous evening for this photograph, shells were falling nearby and gun battles were erupting, and they said, well, actually, the front line is only 300 meters away. And yet life was going on. These people are absolutely, many people in Aleppo, West Aleppo, they're saying, what the hell is the Western world playing at? Is the Western world ignoring the voices of 2 million people in the city? What was quite remarkable is many people were saying, Muslim and Christian, were saying that they want to see the terrorists defeated. Um, and 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 so the battle is raging, but again the voices of a lot of people in the city are ignored. um, and yes, we see on our screens the destruction and the bombings in Aleppo, um, but that's also happening the other way around as well. And the destruction is profound. Now, but as well, what we were told by local people, not by government officials or anybody, particularly in the villages and the towns, the destruction is not just the government. The government is accused of it, and I'm sure there's a lot of it happens when the government's been bombing terrorist-held areas. But also the terrorists have been coming into towns and villages and destroying the homes and factories and community buildings of anybody that opposes them. And there have been battles to try and keep them out. And so the destruction is two ways. Again, it's not just a one-sided thing. All parties have been involved, and um, the country's been destroyed by this battle, much of which is being waged from outside. I mean, it is now a proxy war inside Syria, led by many parties and many outside interests, which is tragic. Um, and the people of Syria are hurting. Um,
When you see destruction like in that
oh,
picture that we've just seen, you do wonder how you clear up after something like that.
yeah, I know, absolutely, and I think I don't think any of us travelled that 5 hours through towns and villages that looked like that, and through parts of Aleppo which were completely destroyed, without almost having tears in our eyes, because you wonder how it will be cleared up. The war will end. In fact, plans are being made to rebuild Syria already by Syrians. Um, and people are saying, and government people and internal opposition leaders are saying, we will rebuild the country, but it will take time, and the longest, most difficult part will be rebuilding trust between communities. If Syria is allowed to maintain its diverse, plural um, basis, because actually, if the extremists are allowed to win, I mean, you'll. I think what local Christians and local people feel is that the Christians will be out, the Alawites will be out or killed. It'll be a sectarian, Shia. I mean, this nonsense about creating a democratic government. Um, what democracy are these extremists going to bring to Syria when their declared intention is an Islamist state, um, and when their rhetoric is one of violence and retribution and revenge on many of the communities?
Well,
Uh,
I think Libya gives us a bit of a clue to the answer to that question.
oh, yeah. So I think you're right. You're going to have a failed state or a Islamist state. Um, and I stress here, and I want to tell you, I'm a priest, and I've been working for years with Muslims, what I'm also trying to say in Syria is that actually the good relationship between Christians and Muslims has been a foundational aspect of life in Syria, and actually on the ground in many places continues to be. This is why it's so traumatic and so painful for the faith communities as well. Um, and for the next few years, I'm going to be focusing on doing PhD research into Christian-Muslim relations in Syria. Um, and try and assist in that understanding of the impact of the conflict and how those relations can be sustained and improved and developed on the basis of the past as well.
Well, in this image, then, despite all the destruction that's going on around them, these children look reasonably happy.
Now, this image, it is actually in an internally displaced refugee camp in a school. These children actually belong to are children of fathers and uncles who have been brutally murdered by the rebels. In fact, this family, they're free. I think it was an elderly woman told us how her husband and three sons, both 30, 40, and late 40s, um, were actually killed and beheaded. Um, and of course, leaving many orphans. Now, this is a story of millions of Syrians now. We confronted them. We said, right, okay, you come from rebel-held areas. Of course, the West is saying that you're fleeing the brutality of the Assad regime, and they laughed. They said they talked about the brutality of the rebels that had come into their village, how they'd killed many young men, they'd killed anybody who opposed them, and these people had fled, like many millions of others, to government-held areas. They told how actually in one of the villages, 130 men were murdered as they tried to flee. And again, they mentioned the FSA within this, and you know, the West talks about the FSA as if they're harmless moderates. Well, the evidence of voices that we've heard there it does not suggest that. Um, I have to say as well, I mean, people say, what about the moderates? Well, most Syrians I've met sort of say there's no such thing as a moderate. Well, I actually think that there are. I think there are people who genuinely would like to see a secular society and a different way of being. I think they do exist, but I think that they're very few. They're actually those who are fighting on the other side or with the other side um, are few and have very little influence. The power and the numbers of the extremists amongst them are all intertwined now. Is much greater, as of course is the monetary input from Qatar and so forth and other countries that want to see the extremists prevail. Um, so it's very complex. It's very multi-layered.
Okay, and but you know, everywhere you look, there is this type of destruction. And
Yeah.
was this also Aleppo?
This picture, I think, was taken on in one of the towns, passing through one of the towns on the way to Aleppo, or it might be, I can't remember. Actually, so many towns are like this. It could well be on the outskirts of Aleppo as we approached into western Aleppo. Um, and yet, then when you get into the government-held areas, you see towns and cities living a fair. I mean, even Homs. I mean, the idea that Homs is completely destroyed. Well, I've been to Homs several times in the last 2 years. You know, one third of the city is destroyed. Actually, parts of it are being rebuilt now that the terrorists have been removed. Um, but two-thirds of the city is like any British city on a Saturday morning, except for the fact that there are regular car bombs by the rebels or attacks, and people are suffering attacks. But actually, life is normal. And in these places, in the government-held areas, remember that 6.9 million people have fled the rebel-held areas into the government areas and are being looked after there. Um, and that's where a degree of, in inverted commas, normality prevails, but a very painful and hard one, reality too.
Yes. So, yeah, just another example of life seeming
Yeah,
to go on.
this picture is Aleppo. This is Aleppo, and this is what much of Aleppo looks like.
So,
And the community, yeah,
yeah,
and the
sorry, go
communities
ahead.
are living side by side and getting on with their lives, or trying to get on with their lives.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, Andrew, what do you think people should be doing in this country to try to address this situation? Because clearly there's uh, political policy at work here. Assad has been considered persona non grata, and it seems like uh, our political leadership wants to get rid of him at any cost. What do you see? Is there some kind of political pressure or some kind of pressure we can, as individuals, can put on government to change this, or are there just too many vested interests, in your opinion?
I think there are many vested interests. I think this is way beyond Syria. Uh, I I think I'm appalled at the media. I mean, Syrians have said to me, often actually people have said to me, what do you think? And I say actually what I think doesn't matter. What I think is irrelevant. What really matters is what Syrians think and what Syrians on the ground are experiencing. Um, I think our media are playing a very, very dirty war, a lot of our media. Um, and and the objectivity or listening to different voices has just absolutely gone out of the window. I wish politicians and I wish church people, church leaders, would actually put pressure on the government to try and talk to the parties. You can't exclude the government of a country, whether you like it or not. Um, uh, there should be dialogue. You can't have preconditions in a situation like this because it's so complicated and so multi-layered. Um, so the pressure to talk, the pressure to listen to people's voices. When in the BBC or ITV or Channel 4, when have they actually gone and interviewed people in West Aleppo, or should interviewed religious leaders, Christian or Muslim, or gone to visit the Doctors' Council in the city of Aleppo as we did, and hear the stories there, and be told actually the misrepresentation of the situation that's being told on East Aleppo. Um, when have our media tried to hear those voices? I think we should, but I think that there are vested interests. Um, I, I I I believe that actually Syrians could do it. Syrians could bring about something if they were able to. Many Syrians have said, we've said to Syrians, what do you say? And many have actually said, for goodness sake, the international community should leave us alone. We,
Yeah.
you know, we could, we need to sort out our own country. We as Syrians, what right has the international community to impose its will, to put in place a person that we don't want, whoever that might be? Um, uh, Syrians need to be listened to. The country needs to be, and we need to be engaging with different parties. Um, my fear is that if the international community do get rid of Assad at the moment, it's just almost unbearable to think of what the outcome would be of that. Uh, you know, um, and that's not saying Assad is a hero or whatever. I mean, it's just a fact. Um, what else is there at the moment? It's just too awful to contemplate.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Okay. Well, look, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. I think we'll leave it there. But just before we go, what's next for you? You're working on research towards a PhD. Are you speaking anywhere? Are you doing any public engagements?
I'm I am giving talks around the country and in various places, and I will be intensely visiting Syria again to spend time with the faith communities there to really do some proper research, um, and with the intention, hopefully, of enabling and encouraging thinking on talking to people and listening to, and particularly in the subject that I'm exploring. Um, how we can rebuild trust and strengthen relationships that have existed, and how we can see beyond the conflict. My next few years will be focused on this PhD, and that will require a little bit of uh, sort of more background work, if you like,
Yeah.
um, uh, and 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 hopefully sharing the message. Sharing the voices. I'm giving lots of talks around the country, actually.
So how do we
Uh,
find out? How do we find out where and when you're speaking?
uh, um, Good question. Um, Somewhere online, you'll probably be able to find it.
Right. So
I
so
have.
it's basically just finding. Organizers will promote the talk, but you don't have a
That's right.
you
They
don't
do.
have a
So
website of your own.
I don't have a website of my own,
Right.
actually. I do
Okay.
have a blog. I don't often use it, but yes. My report is on my blog at the moment without the pictures, but it's of the latest visit.
And how do we find
And
that?
it's if you look up Andrew Ashdown, I think me.blog or so.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not a great technological whiz kid. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. Well, look, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. The comments in the chat box have been very positive, and I think you've made some really important points there. So thanks again for joining us. Anytime you want to do this again, if you've got anything you would
Thank
like to report, please get in touch.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, and bless you on all your work and our mutual friends as well.
Okay. Thank you very
Okay,
much, and
thank
thanks for
you.
everybody
Okay.
for joining us today. We'll be back as usual at 1 o'clock tomorrow with David Scott. We'll see you then. Bye bye.